Hello everybody and welcome to Toy to You Curator's Corner episode number 24. My name's Sean Brosnahan. I'm a curator at Toy to Otago Settlers in Dunedin. I've been telling these little stories about early Dunedin history since the coronavirus lockdown and just keeping them going now. Now in the last episode I talked about how crime-free early Dunedin was and how that great streak was broken in 1855 with the robbery of the Custom House. But I also admitted that there was a level of criminality below that, including petty assaults, and it's one of those I want to talk about today. Now this assault has a decidedly comical aspect to it, well at least from our point of view looking back. I'm sure it was pretty serious for the people concerned at the time. And it relates to two families who had been shipmates on the Philip Laing in 1848 and who had been close neighbours ever since in the 11 years that they had spent in Otago, because it happened in 1859. The parties involved were Archibald MacDonald and his wife Janet McGregor on the one side, and George Crawford, his wife Margaret Lorimer, and their son Peter Crawford on the other. Now Archibald MacDonald had been a schoolteacher in Stirling in Scotland before emigrating on the Philip Laing with his wife Janet and their three children. Thereafter, he ran for a time a private school in Anderson's Bay, but his main activity seems to have been running a small farmlet up on the hill above Dunedin in what is now Stewart Street, near the corner of Cargill Street. Now here in the Toy To collection we have this painting of the wattle and daub cottage that Archibald MacDonald built there. You can see one of his children by the door, and in the foreground a goat and some birds. Let's say they're chickens. Now, one of them plays a starring role in this story too. George and Margaret Crawford lived next door, and I'm afraid we have no photos surviving of them. They had been tenant farmers in Perthshire before emigrating with their three children and Margaret's unmarried sister, Anne. They were actually too old to qualify for the assisted passages by which they managed to come out to Otago on the Philip Laing, but they simply lied about their age and pushed them down. So they were in their 50s, which was much older than almost everybody else on board. In fact, I think older than everybody else on board. But it's their son, Peter, who is the key player in this story. He was charged in court in 1859 with assault and beating of his parents' neighbour, Janet MacDonald. And it must be said that Peter Crawford actually had a significant prior in this regard. As a 16-year-old on the voyage out from Scotland, Peter had been repeatedly bullied by one of the sailors on board the ship. Finally he snapped. He grabbed a knife and stabbed the sailor. Now fortunately, the sailor was wearing a thick leather belt and it turned the blade of the knife so no harm was done. But you can imagine it made quite a kerfuffle at the time, and the Reverend Thomas Burns had to formally discipline young Peter Crawford. The punishment was to have his head shaved and then undertake cleaning tasks on the ship for the next couple of weeks. And now here he was again, 11 years later, before the Dunedin Resident Magistrates Court, once again charged with assault, this time against a middle-aged woman. So what had gone wrong? And did Peter Crawford have an anger management problem? Well, there are two sides to every story, of course, and Peter Crawford in this case seems to have been caught in the crossfire of one of those sorts of antagonisms that can brew up between close neighbours that are set off by sometimes the smallest thing. And in this case, it was a chicken. It would appear that the MacDonald's chickens had been in the habit of straying into the Crawford's wheat field next door and picking their way through the crop. On this particular day, old George Crawford had had enough. He grabbed a gun and shot the offending bird dead. Peter then passed that news on to the MacDonald boys next door. They told their mother. She rousted her husband out, and mightily aroused, angry as hell, they stormed off next door to confront old George out in his garden. Now here's where it gets tricky. According to George Crawford, he was just minding his own business in the middle of his garden when he saw the neighbours approach. He went down to the gate to meet them, and Archie MacDonald promptly whacked him over the head with the dead chicken. Twice. And then when the gate opened, he got into a stance with his dukes up and then began pummeling old George with his fists. Janet MacDonald then joined the fray, grabbing old George from behind, with them both then taking a tumble. And this was where young Peter Crawford came in, pulling Janet off his father and holding her back while George dealt with Archie. Janet naturally had a quite different version of events. According to her, old George Crawford was the aggressor, attacking her husband such that she of course had to pitch in, grabbing Crawford's vest from behind to hold him back. She claimed that young Peter Crawford then attacked her, knocking her to the ground and putting his knee into her for good effect before joining his father in striking Archie. When Janet rejoined the fray, grabbing Peter's shirt sleeve, she claimed he struck her again and forced her to the ground with his knees before hitting her several times. Now, who would you believe? Well, the resident magistrate didn't know either, so he simply dismissed the case. But Janet MacDonald was very lucky to escape incarceration when she began haranguing the Crawfords in the court. If she couldn't control her temper, Magistrate Gillies said, he would hand her over to the constables. Not long after this, the MacDonalds moved to Halfway Bush, so I suppose no reconciliation had been possible after this dramatic court case. So even in an ideal society of pious Presbyterians, petty irritations could swiftly get out of hand. Our pioneers were very human after all. And if it comes to a deadly weapon, a dead chicken over the head is not a bad choice.